Welcome, welcome. For you, this is your first time doing this with me. For me, this is round 2 because round 1 got interrupted so many times that then I lost recordings and now the lighting's changed anyway. We'll try this again. The lighting is now worse. I'm trying this top-down style a bit more because it allows me to do a little bit more with various decks, make sense for this tag, and yeah, it's just something I'm trying, but I would like to hear how it works for people watching because the lighting sort of blows out this bit a bit because it's overhead. Let me know what you think. Is it bothering you? Is it not? Normally, I don't ask because, you know, if it works for me, that's what's the most important, but this is comfortable, so I'm asking. With that weird intro, hey folks, we are jumping into an older tag called Perfect Pairs by Lisa Papez, 𝗪𝗁𝗁𝗂𝗃, and this was really inspired by the fact that I saw 𝗪𝘁𝗄𝗃, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, jumping into this tag because it's never too late, and I will share her video below in the doobly. So thank you for the prompt to jump into this. And one of the reasons that I thought doing the Perfect Pairs tag would be fun is years ago I did a very similar tag called Deck Combos or something like that by, I think, Amber in Wonderland. And back then my pairings were very much focused on specific approaches. So I might like the artwork to be similar or by the same artists was even better. Complementary themes, so both nature as an example or leaning into a contrast but complementary colours, so like a really dark deck and a really light deck aesthetically. You see where I'm going with this. Nowadays, it's not to say that any of that's non-existent. Sometimes it comes up. I definitely have a pairing that kind of birthed in that way. But rather, I feel like I've moved beyond this and kind of gone rogue from my previous approaches. I tend to randomly feel the urge to work with 2, 3, 4 decks together. And that's basically it. I feel like working with them and then I just chuck them all together, and it's a very experiential process that then tends to be the decider. So they may not match at all through various lenses. It's funny because the middle process isn't massively different, just the approach. But because of this approach, my deck pairings have expanded like beyond my comprehension at this stage. And that's what coaxed me back into it. For today, I've decided to make a few rules for myself to make this a reasonably sized video. I will be sticking to tarot and oracle pairings only, as in practice I mix tarot and tarot, oracle and oracle. I am happy to share some of that later in the day if there's enough interest. Anyway, I've chosen 11 pairings, but a bonus pairing as well called the originals, which takes us up to 12. And I will explain the originals when we get there. I had to pick a number because in my practice, I mix and match to my heart's content. I could fill up a week with this discussion easily. And yeah, I have a fair size collection, so everything is fair game. So for this, the 11 of the 12 are either all-time favourite pairings, ones I'm enjoying right now, or simply ones that sprung to mind, sometimes prompted by other pairings. Finally, I have stuck to the idea of a pair, just 2 decks, not to get too fancy, because again, in my practice, I do enjoy getting more decks out and kind of having a read and a play and meshing them all together. If you need an example, think Lennon Smith's video response to my Tarot Lull video, I believe. It's a really great video. I highly recommend watching it if you want to see someone kind of playing with a lot of decks in a less reading heavy focus. And I'll link that below as well. So we're going for this second time round, which means the beautiful pairings that appeared in my first videos not necessarily going to come up again. But I mean, the decks will, but the cards have been all mishmashed together. But let's do this. First up, we've got the Trionfi Della Luna illustrated pips in the Aquadoxial. And this is a new deck. This was gifted to me by one of my besties as a belated birthday / early Yule present. I'm very happy with this. And in the middle, we've got my beloved Memento Mori. The reason that I've laid them out like this, by the by, is because when I'm using just a tarot and oracle pairing, I really like to do one of my standard 3-card pulls, 2 tarot and an oracle. So that's the way that I have shown the visual. I know a few people that do this, but I'm going to tell you now, this video is not going to be as professional as Don Michelle's. So just a heads up, but very similar layout. This is a funny one because this pairing was one of the examples where it simply birthed from the fact that I had my Memento on a tiny weeny hiatus, which is unusual for me, but if you see my deck lull video, I wasn't particularly working with cards in a reading capacity per se, other ways, yes. But I also got this, and I was like, right, let's put them together then and see what happens, basically. And it was really fun doing it this way. But something that I realised pretty quickly, can we take a moment? And no, this didn't pop up in the original video. You're getting all fresh insights now. But I love the concept of 𝗕𝗂𝗁𝗃 here for strength as strength of heart and being heart-centered, and opening that as well, not just kind of physical strength, which sometimes obviously gets depicted, but then some of the synchronicities that come through when you're sort of observing such different decks in this way is like it says 𝗕𝗂𝗁𝗃, and here you can see this is all spilling out overboard. And I like considering what those 3 things mean to each other and how these two like really contrast each other, but yet there can be meaning sort of spun from that. When I'm catching my tears, how does that show up in this Ace of Cups? You know, what part of me am I preserving, and how is that defining my, I suppose, my emotional compass? That's kind of the vibe I'm getting without going into like a whole reading. The main thing for me that works about these pairings, which I really love and has made it a favourite, even though it's early days, this is a very early pairing, is that the Memento to me feels like a very serious deck in my craft. And actually, this Triumphe feels very playful, you know? It gives me these really punchy readings so far, but the delivery feels kind of cheeky, and so they kind of, I don't want to say balance each other out in a way that neutralises it. It doesn't for these, but it's cheeky. Yeah, it really opens up the Memento into something different that I perhaps wouldn't get from this when reading another deck with it. Next, we have retained the Memento Mori, but we have added in the Marigold Tarot. And these two are another where I wanted to do a year ahead spread, which is pretty out of the ordinary for me. And I wanted to use tarot, oracle, and my runes as part of a rune study. And basically, instead of thinking about deck pairings, I just picked up my favourites, because I'm going to tell you now that these two decks for me are an absolute 10 out of 10. Not just because they make sense to my aesthetic desires, which, let's face it, they very much are. They're definitely a mood. But they're also my all-time favourite decks because they make sense to me within my practice. You know, they look like my craft. They are chef's kiss. And because of that, I really feel that them working so well together makes sense anyway. Not because of the more obvious, like they do have that kind of death, life, intrinsic, cyclical nature woven into their presentation. And obviously you could say, yes, there's skeletons galore. I like me some skeletons. But it's more that this is what my craft looks like. It's what my craft feels like. Hilarious that the snake's upside down with the hanged man. I mean, look, I really get a lot from these two decks, and I don't know if I'd have paired them as quickly other than the fact that, like I said, it was very much, I want to use these, and that's what I'm going to put together. So now we're sticking with the Marigold Tarot, but we've added in the 𝗵𝘁𝗿𝗄𝗺 Oracle by the lovely Megs. And the mood. In fact, this is a little thicker. There we go. Let's balance them out a little bit better. These happened for a very similar reason. Actually, they happened first. So I wanted to pick my word of the year before my wheel ahead spread. My year ahead. And was having a torrid time trying to think of a word. Probably trying to force myself, if I'm honest. But then I was thinking about tree energy and this deck, and of course it's got one keyword, which the keywords in it feel very fitting and expansive, and again complementary to my practice and my approach. They feel sort of therapeutically inclined as well, which I love. And I wanted to also pick a card for like a year's energy before I got into the specifics of each month. So again, I was already using the Marigold Tarot, and I thought, oh, I'll just use the two together, and they worked so beautifully, but it had such a powerful impact that I have tried them together since, and honestly. The way that I would describe these two together in my experience is the combination of them gives me like an otherworldly, through the veil spirit vibe. And yes, I could get that definitely from the Marigold with the Memento, but this feels different. It feels more like agreeing to pass through a threshold when using these two together, and for that reason it is one that I use less frequently, because they're those bigger energetic readings, right? But they are so good together for me. And if anyone's curious, I believe for my pull, I did check earlier, obviously brain, but I think I pulled the story card, the Six of Cups, and then I still pulled a rune as well, which was 𝗵𝗵𝗄𝗵𝗺, I believe, if I am pronouncing that correctly. But I love these two together. It is funny to me how I've ended up having like a deck movement with two pairs, but they're not all like that. However, we have kept the 𝗵𝘁𝗿𝗄𝗺 Oracle, and now we've got the Animal Wise Tarot, which, heads up, I don't know if you can get this deck. Also, if you can, it's likely not this printing, because this is the first edition printing and the second edition looks different. But as you can see from these, or at least I feel like people will say this is not a good looking combination, I've become very fond of it, but it definitely wouldn't have been one that I thought, oh yes, aesthetically these two are going to vibe. So I think that this is a really good example of like how I've come to these curious but glorious companions. And the way that this was created was because these are both decks that I go to in search of like comfort, really, as well as like a standard reading. But I really feel this energy is shared between them. And then on the other hand, the trees kind of bring in this bigger archetypal invitation or reminder to me, especially when I'm reading more psychology inclined or focused. The animal wise is able to move with these themes, and it has that heavy dose of animal archetype and wisdom that I enjoy so much, but it doesn't move away from this initial focus. They really do that well together. I think part of it is, firstly, they're all real depictions, so these are photographic decks. But also the thing that they share, I suppose, is this stillness. And perhaps that's why I find them comforting. Like, and as an example, and a spoiler for the next pairing, but hey ho, the next pairing, the Brady Tarot and the Arcane Bullshit, they really like shake up my shit. Whereas these two, I feel like they will sit in stillness with me, that they are able to be in that suspended time, and they really meet me where I'm at. I suppose something more neutral, and that's not to say they're not saying anything, but as I say, as a duo, they're just really meeting me where I'm at, and there's a different kind of energy to that. So here is the Brady and the Arcane Bullshit. And before we get into this deck, if you don't like crude, rude, funny humour, cartoon penises, that kind of thing, you're not going to like this deck. Maybe you're going to want to skip ahead. You will be missing out on why these two work so well together, but that is, of course, your prerogative. So there is your heads up. Now, the Brady and the Arcane Bullshit were a really fun experiment that just turned out ace, basically. It was an experiment based on the Arcane Bullshit, which I know very much how it was created. I was part of the Kickstarter. I know the intention is definitely to almost poke fun a bit at the occult, because we're so good at taking ourselves seriously, and sometimes it's a little bit too much. So this deck does that really well. The creator Evan has just a hilarious sense of humour that is definitely a flavour. I think it's funny. You may not, which is fine. So the experiment was, what else can this deck do, if anything? And what I found out really quickly when using these two together, and I was doing regular Instagram polls with them some years back, and my gosh, I was getting some really profound, deep, meaningful, some just really significant readings from these pairings. And it wasn't like I was trying to force it on this. They definitely could have remained funny. Obviously, we do have not an element of force, but we have an element of sway, because we're using them. We're projecting onto them how we feel. We're having a relationship with the artwork, all of that stuff. So I can definitely do both. I love that they're like shouting out, and this one's got the hand. It's almost like they're both hungry. They're all looking in the same direction as well. Have you noticed? Yeah, I'm getting distracted by the imagery, because I freaking love it. It is just a mood for me. There were some really good pairings coming up on the first video, and I'm really gutted it didn't record actually. So what I thought was quite interesting anyway about that is that it really made me see the Arcane Bullshit in a different way. Departure, but then hang in there. Excellent. I feel like it's because when we depart something, we never it's not just gone, right? There's a lot of residue, especially in the Eight of Cups, from what we're moving away from. Usually because it's a very choiceful experience. We've had that very reflective 7, and so it's like, hang in there, because you know it's not a quick fix, and choices have to be made, because the Lovers is very choice orientated for me. Told you, distractible. As I say, it's like it does this whole fun, silly thing, and of course it can be used for that, even with this deck. But like more so, it had this whole other potential that if I hadn't have tried to sort of test it out, I suppose, and put it to the test, I just would have had no clue whatsoever. So what a card to finish on. Anyway, that's these two together. So I forgot we were keeping the Brady Tarot out, but it's back. And I've got the Oracle of Oddities. It's 1, 2 and 3, which I've just grabbed a chunk of. But it is all 3 of them. And these 3 together give me the no sugar-coated, ball-busting readings that I enjoy diving into. The Brady Tarot just feels like such an honest depiction of nature. And then met with the Oracle of Oddities, which obviously it feels like this, but it also feels like a really honest depiction of the human psyche and elements of just being human on top of our animal parts. I cannot remember for the life of me what made me blend these two. I would imagine that, again, it was just, I was very keen to use them together, and I did so probably again on Instagram, as well as obviously behind in my own practice. But these were 2 of the ones, and this is a really gorgeous example actually. These are 2 of the ones where there was something that happened for me in using decks that weren't created by the same artist to go together, that aren't visually aligned in the same art style, where I suppose I started to pay even more attention to themes that connect them, because they're not automatically going to look like that. Like when I use the Woodland Tarot and I use the Earthbound Oracle, I expect to see repeating themes in the artwork. And by themes, I mean things like symbols and stuff as well, because they're created by the same artist. There'll be things that they like, and they're then in all of their decks, or a lot of their decks. The first thing I notice about these 3, to make some sense of for you of what I'm saying, is they've all got this really leafy thing going on. So here in the middle I've got expand, and then all of these, like, I don't know what this plant is, but all of it growing out. And then actually when I look at both of these, they've got very leafy areas to them as well. We've got a winged insect here, we've got a winged insect there, we've got a winged bird here. So there's a lot of air, there's a lot of greenery and flight as well going on. There's a lot of expansion in the full card in terms of keywords, but that visual is something that, I don't know, there's something about these odd bod pairings, and these pairings that I didn't come to because, oh, I think these 2 decks would go together, which again, that's not something I'm against. I still do it. I have a pairing that does that later. But there's something about it that leads me into more curiosity about this, and then I really notice, like with these 2, when that pops up, and that adds a whole new fresh and fun level. There's some other decks that I do like notice the colour with as well. I mean, green's a bit of a given with the greenery here, but like even with the leafiness, it's not like every card's like that. These are the 2 that I pulled before. They're very, very watery. Actually, if you look at the Nightmares card, that's got the blue as well. So it stands out. and it stands out more to me because of how different they are. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that and this like really honest depiction of life and nature and not sugarcoating definitely is a mood, and I really enjoy that about these two. This is when we put the really bad overhead lighting to the test, because this is a very glossy deck, my friends. So next up we have the Fallen Angels Oracle and the Antique Anatomy Ephemera Tarot. And this came about because I work with the Fallen Angels in a very real way. And what I mean by that is not just the Oracle as just the Oracle and the visual depictions, the Fallen Angels, demons, they're things that I work with in my craft, entities, energies that I work with. I've actually got a really good book, but side note. And whilst I have paired this and it looked exquisite with things like the Tarot of Vampires, one of the things that I find about really working with whatever fallen angel comes up is that there's a demand for my attention, and I find that pippish decks are really the way forward for me when I work with them in my craft, because I utilise this as a way to kind of expand upon the conversation, and I can do that with any deck, but of course I've got my preferences, and to me the pips give me that more spacious feeling of communication without the distraction of other forms, other beings. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but because it's not just a reading, it's usually more focused on working with them as opposed to pulling cards. And I have just pulled cards with the Fallen Angels before, don't get me wrong, and it works wonderfully for that as well. I adore this deck. It really, a part of it just aesthetically really reminds me of being a young grungy meets gothic kind of pre-teen and going to hang out in the graveyard and feeling super edgy and odd and all of that fun stuff. But yeah, more so I find that this gives me the space. Oh, I've actually turned that one upside down on purpose. Clever. It gives me the space to do this particular working, and I like having the room for that. So that's that one. Welcome to one of two of my biggest cliche pairings, but I still wanted to talk about this one. We have the very popular Oat Tarot, that's his nickname, the Oak Ash and Thorn, and then also very popular Woodland Wardens Oracle. And this pairing can be found just about everywhere at the moment. Just about everywhere. It still wasn't the aesthetics that made me pair these though. And I had seen this pairing. I had thought about it as well, but I had also seen this pairing before my Woodland Wardens arrived because mine got delayed. And it really works. And the reason being is the Woodland Wardens for me, the central one, is very much the focal animal gnosis or animal medicine, if that term makes more sense to those who sort of haven't known me for very long, like animal messenger. That's the key focus for me. And then the beautiful thing that the Oat deck does is it retains that animal-like wonder and that world, and it sort of defines the nuance of what this animal is bringing me, but it doesn't distract me. And the reason being is, especially in the minors, the animals in this deck are done in suits, so the pentacles are all hares. It feels like a different inclusion of animal energy, a less obvious one. When this happens, I do obviously pay attention though. Hello, Fox. And how's that for a message? Can we just take a moment? Like when our mind is trapped in Three of Swords and we're not seeing a way out, especially because the sort of, I suppose, heightened emotional aspect of a otherwise very communicative, blocks communicative, intellect, thought-based energy. It's like, yeah, we need adaptability. So we've got foxes, we need adaptability. What are some of the aspects that are either hindering this or going to help and infuse it? And the pace of the Eight of Wands really feels like, okay, well, you know, we need some movement because this is not working for us. The coming together of the three is too, instead of just trying to think of a word for it and then editing for ages, yeah, there's something about that energy, like it's too confined, it's too focused in on this point, it needs shaking up. It just really does do that kind of animal world view, but without adding too much confusion to it for me, I suppose is what I want to say. And of course the majors do have their own individual animals, but yeah, it feels like a thoughtful but very pretty animal tarot deck, whereas this feels like working with a very specific animal to me. They both also give me those kind of natural history vibes, but in their own way. Next up, I have the Gentle Tarot and the Roots and Wings Oracle. And this is another very gentle pairing, sort of similar to my experience with the Tree Whisper and the Animal Wires Tarot, but even more gentle still. Like, not just because of the name, this is really how this tarot comes across. Like, it very much embodies its name, and that's how I experienced this oracle deck. So they were two that when it was a particular time at the end of, I don't know, it could be 2019, it could have been 2020, who knows what is time. But I was focused on fostering more rest, like internally. So what I mean by that is I was trying to quieten my mind through a variety of techniques, and then was doing like a few readings to complement this, basically. And because these two are two that I associated with that feeling at the time, it felt like a fun combination, especially because if I recall, the Gentle Tarot was new in, and again, I was looking for things that could, you know, that I could try out with it, that I was using at the time, that I was enjoying. And needless to say, this one remained very focused on that sensation that I was looking for, what I was looking to foster. We've got this sense in all three of them of like being somewhere alone. I don't know why I get a singular vibe from this. Perhaps it's just the other two complementing it. We've got these very complementary sort of path-like shapes. We've got mountains being repeated throughout. Some of the colours that I'm really noticing are like the fiery red hues, because that's where our focus is being drawn to the inner flame that we're taking from this kind of tower, because it's a very meditative tower. The really orange stark contrast from this tent, and then looking towards the sunshine, and you could go sunshine or sunset. But colour play is something that I really enjoy between these two, and I don't know why they're ones that I notice more, but it is a fun additional layer that I do in some of my readings, just when it feels relevant, when it pops up. I've got to stop doing that because otherwise we'll stop talking and I'll just be enjoying the pairings. But basically that's a layer. It doesn't always come up every time without a fail. This gives me a bit less of that, and as you can tell, sometimes I'm more focused on like the shared symbolism that comes up in the pictures or something like that. But colour play is definitely an aspect to these, so I thought I would give you an example of that while I could. I nearly put my Roots and Wings away and then remembered that I had a cheeky one to share, still in the the deck count that I'd said, but the reason I say cheeky is because this is when the aesthetic becomes a little bit more purposeful, but it was still definitely a playful blending between how would these two even work together, because these two feel like very contrasting energies to me. So if anyone doesn't recognise this, this is the Brady Tarot still, but this is the first edition, which is far smaller, and this is quite a small deck anyway. So in terms of just like usage and size, it's far more complementary. But also there's something about the Brady having these like lighter borders that, I don't know, how does it soften it? Or perhaps it's just the different bond, because I had this one longer, obviously, because it's the first edition. But with these two, I get to kind of this like yummy middle place from their blending. I don't know if that makes sense, but this is like, as I say, quite a challenging deck visually, and its keywords, it does that all so well. And whilst this has a couple of keywords in it that might feel challenging to people at points, it's a very soft oracle deck. Like, soft is what it does so well. And I think that the contrast of the two really intrigued me. I mean, how do you feel about this combo? I'm genuinely intrigued, because I don't think it's one that I would have naturally put together. Oh, awesome. Success, enchantment, joy, bursts of colour. I love it. Not so much success for these two, but you probably, I don't know, it's quite zoomed in, you can probably see that. So that's those pairing anyway. Here we get to the pairing that firstly prompted me not capping this at 10. It's the Faeries Oracle, and next to it is the Tarot of Hidden Realms. This is also a great example of one that was conceived in the previous way that I mentioned, where I thought fairy decks, these will work. And they do. So it's not a broken method by any means, which is why I said no shade whatsoever. And a reason that this was a lovely example to share. I'm sure lots of people pair these two together, although interestingly enough, the Fae energy feels very different. I kind of expected that. Like, this to me, and I am going to be that cliche person who says it's very how I view Fae, it's very strong Fae energy, it's a real mix. What made it a working combo was that because this feels different and less full on, although it's a very emotive deck for me, they both are in different ways. But in the same way that I would work with the Fallen Angels and I want something not as direct in my face as the other two, these really complement itself. It's almost like when you get some really strong Fae energy to work with, that these tarot cards sort of, I don't know, rescue you from the sheer sass. It's really hard to explain. It's probably the hardest pairing for me to explain, even though it's one of the ones that I've been using the longest. Like, I use quite a few decks with the Faeries Oracle, to be honest. The Antique Anatomy, the Earthbound Oracle, the Woodland Tarot. The decks that I do enjoy using with the Faeries Oracle do seem to all have themes of nature somehow filtered in without me even being mindful of it. But this pairing is timeless, just over and over and over again. And I have to say, because even though this feels, the tarot feels, gentler's not the word, just less in my face. With this pairing, I have just pulled one from each as well, as opposed to like 2 tarot or 3 tarot or 4. It really depends what mood I'm in and how willing I am to go into that. But if you work with the Fae and this is an energy that you enjoy, it's definitely a worthwhile one trying out. And not just for the aesthetic, but of course, I think the aesthetic matches, although really does it, or is it just because we know it's all fae and nature? Because they're very different representations of fairies, right? These are much more, I don't know, they're in between realm between fae as like more of a creature and varying creatures at that, like the Faeries Oracle. And then they're not Victorian fairies because, of course, they've not got all the Victorian garb on and all of that stuff. But they are very human looking. There is a very human lens on them. And so actually there's something that they don't share very much of at all, other than these two have these gloriously pointy ears. Oh, 3. But yeah. I would definitely recommend trying these out together still. And then finally, we have what I have been referring to in the beginning as the original pairing. And the original pairing is something in and of itself, which is why I wanted to share it, because the original pairing wasn't a decision based on anything other than only having these decks. And so it's far less about do they work together, and more about they're going to work together, because I suppose need them to. I was pretty young when I started out with these decks, so I'm not even sure I thought about it as a need. There was just probably a lack of thought there altogether. It just so happens they have medicine in both of their names, but this was my first deck and this was my second deck ever. And I suppose in terms of them being both very nature-based, and there are definitely some animal inclusions in the Medicine Woman Tarot, which now I'm saying it, I don't know if I said it properly before, but anyway, aside from that, they're not the same. Artistically, they are not a choice that I feel many people would make. But they are the founders of my Oracle animal and tarot practice, and they are the original pairing, because this was it. This is what I had to pair. And whilst I predominantly worked with them individually, I have worked with them together. I certainly tried to work with them together because, of course, I was young, so like this is a lot of information to ingest, and I'm sure there was a lot of play as well involved. From memory, I would work with the tarot and then work the animal message in, because of course I was still studying this. I'm not native to a bunch of these animals, and therefore, especially at a younger age when I had far less knowledge, I would do what I was doing with these cards and then read the medicine card entry and try and fathom a way of them tying into each other, which of course now would be, I would say, easy peasy. I actually think that these now for me would be a very seamless pairing, because no matter how much my practice may have changed, these founders still happen to be big. This holds a lot of meaning to me, this deck. This gives me some, I don't use it all the time now. I go through real fits and starts with it. I use this a freaking lot, but it has something that I don't get from other decks, just because they can't. I feel like they can't, because of how I bonded with this. You can probably hear my cat and her plate. Sorry, she's a noisy nightmare, but we love her. But yeah, reading these together now, like, it's almost making me want to do it. Oh, they're all upside down. Never mind. We'll finish up on these. But I thought the original pairing would be fun, and I'm really curious if anyone had like just 2 decks or 3 decks to start out with for a really long time. Did you happen to pair them? Do you have an original pairing? Because I don't know. It was just a fun, silly addition for me. So there you have it. That is my perfect pairings. I have nothing else to add. I have filmed this twice. I am exhausted. I need to clean. So I hope you enjoyed it. The people that I mentioned, their links are, like I said, in the doobly, and I will catch you all again soon. Bye.